piloting your rickety wooden ship across these cursed oceans. It's Voyager, please. Hateful Voyage of the Delta Quadrant. My name is Joseph.
And I'm your parent that you have dishonored and subsequently sent to Klingon hell, Peter.
And Peter, what episode have we reviewed this week?
We're getting into Season 6, Episode 3, Barge of the Dead.
This is an episode that I think the personal enjoyment of any person watching is completely reliant on how much they like Ron Moore's Klingon stuff. This is the Ron Moore Klingon episode of Voyager. There are many examples of this in TNG and DS9, and this is the one we get for Voyager because it's like the brief period of time here when we've talked about Ron Moore being a writer on the show, and it is every bit a Klingon mythology episode. If you like this shit, this episode's amazing, right? Like, so much rich history. If you don't care for it, it sucks. I think that's basically the bottom line.
Well, Joe.
Where do you fall on that?
Someone who doesn't give two shits about Klingon lore, I can in fact confirm your hypothesis that it sucked.
As someone who is kind of medium on the idea of all the Klingon stuff, I am medium on this episode. I don't love or hate it. I think it's a cool, like, the idea of building up like Klingon mythology and all of that is interesting. And of course, this is about spirituality in the afterlife, so we all know Joseph's gonna love it. I'm self-aware, but the problem with the Klingon mythology stuff is it gets stuck way up its own asshole way too often, and this is no exception. I don't know. Ron Moore loves sniffing his own farts when it comes to Klingon backstory.
Oh yeah, he's got like a tube coming out of his ass to a gas mask, like airtight over his nose. I haven't taken this few notes on an episode of Star Trek in a long fucking time. Like, I'm not even at half a page, and even 11:59 surpasses. I was playing on my phone and looking out the window and anything and everything except for watching this goddamn episode. I don't think it's a bad episode of Star Trek, but I fucking hated this. And the whole time I'm watching it, did Ron Moore never watch a single Voyager episode previous to this? And also, having to sit through whatever the Borg quartet episode. What was that last one called?
Survival
Instinct.
Yeah,
Survival Instinct wasn't bad.
Yeah.
But following on the heels of that episode and going into this, like, I'm not sad that Ron Moore did not stick with Voyager.
He clearly had a different show in mind. Like, he just was not compatible with what they were doing here. And that is no more clear than this, which just feels like a fucking straight up DS9 episode.
It was.
And,
you read the memo out
later. I saw that later. That was like, oh, this was a DS9 episode. Who would have guessed?
Equinox Part 2. Just we released that today. So I was listening to it in the car. Pretty great episode, all things considered, right? And I will tell you right now, Joe, going back and listening to our Equinox Part 2 episode, the mishandling of the Doctor and that fucking ethics subroutine might be my pick for the weakest shit of Season 6. Like, that was really...
It's going to be hard to top. Like, definitely very hard to beat.
And the problem there, and again, we don't know how much input Ron Moore really had on Equinox Part 2, like which parts he wrote, where his fingerprints really were. Certainly, I think he was a big part of Chakotay arguing with Janeway. I don't know the Doctor becoming a sadist, if that was him. But looking at this episode, looking back on that, potentially a little bit of how 7 of 9 acts, it's clear that either there's not a respect for the characters or an awareness of where the characters currently are in their story journey to the end point, right? If this season 6, episode 3, Barge of the Dead. If this was something out of season 2, season 1, maybe even season 3, where B'Elanna is still trying to come to terms with the Klingon part of her, which really I think faces lays to rest well enough, where she says, I'm both of these people. I need to embrace my Klingon side and just fucking get over it, right? Going back to Equinox, we've done so much character development with the Doctor where we find out he's a real person and more than just the lines of code and this and that. This stuff feels so out of place, and it's just too late in the series to be playing these cards.
We have gone on at length about how the ground on which B'Elanna's character development has been grown has just been just tortured, right? Like, we keep getting the same fucking story for B'Elanna over and over and over again, and we keep having these, B'Elanna's angry and she's kind of a hothead and she pushes people away, and she's gonna have this episode where she really comes to terms with these impulses that she has, and she's gonna grow as a person and as an officer and as a friend and as a lover as a consequence. Every fucking 12 weeks we get a fucking episode like this. It feels like twice a year, and she never actually grows as a consequence because they keep not wanting to advance her character. It's crazy.
I want B'Elanna Torres to be one of my favorite characters.
I do too. She's one of the best actors on the show.
She's one of the best actors, and they've done stories that really, touch me. A late 30s white guy, right? And I'm like, man, I feel what she's got, this conflict between, wanting to be a professional, actually being a nerd. She's an introvert, but she's, under the guise of an, there's a lot of complexity. And instead it's always the fucking, I'm so angry and it's because I'm half Klingon bullshit. It's the same deal with 7 and 9. Like, I want to be a real girl, but I'm afraid and I still want to be a Borg. And minus the Doctor, and we've said this many times, like, minus the Doctor, nobody has consistent, meaningful, and lasting character growth.
We have literally had this character trait in B'Elanna Torres since Seska was still a Starfleet officer. I mean, literally, it's been going on since the very beginning of season 1 that they've had these episodes where she's trying to confront this part of herself. And I will grant, this episode goes a little deeper into backstory that we haven't really explored yet. It's, I think, better written. This is a good example of this story. It's probably better than most of the ones we've seen, but I'm fucking tired of it. And so it kind of made me hate it as a consequence, despite the fact that I think this is actually super well executed in trying to do that story again. It's just Ron Moore is gotten to it like the 5th after 5 other people have tried to do it.
Yes. And what's hilarious is this was supposed to be a DS9 episode per Memory Alpha, because it was too late in the story and it didn't fit, and it was the sore thumb. And it's the exact same fucking problem that we're describing now, only Voyager let it fly. And it almost feels like Ron Moore is like, man, this is a fucking great story about what's anti-Stovacor, the Grethor. I got this great Grethor story, and I think I'm done with the Star Trek thing, but I can't leave until I tell this story. And like he just latched onto Voyager long enough to fucking birth this goddamn Klingon hell episode. And he's like, okay, cool. I can move on to the afterlife and go to BSG. And like you're saying, it's the best version. The Doctor episode, and also too, listening to Equinox Part 2, I don't know why it never dawned on me, with the amount of times that the Doctor's gone rogue or had a bad version of him in place, like, we're going to start calling those Doctor Evils. It's not the evil Doctor. That's just Doctor Evil. There's EMH necessary. Or there's Doctor Evil. How did that never dawn on us? But was it Warhead where he becomes Doctor Evil, the thermonuclear warhead?
Yeah.
That's the best version of that story. And we've had it a few times. Unfortunately, it's so fucking late in the series that it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't work. It's just, I don't care. I'm over it. So same
So
deal here.
the overall point of this story is B'Elanna having an existential crisis as a consequence of her Klingon heritage. Which, what was the episode where she was like doing a bunch of Klingon shit in the holodeck and
That was
trying to,
her worst day at work, where she's
yeah, worst day at work, where she like falls in love with Tom finally, whatever, and the warp core gets ejected. Like, it's like we already
with the
did
fried
that.
chicken people.
Yeah, with the fried chicken people, exactly. Like,
We did it there.
and that
We
was
did it.
season 4, I think. That was
We
2
did it in
years ago.
Faces.
Yeah, Faces in season 1. Like,
I feel like we just did it in Juggernaut, where she's fighting with her anger the whole time while they're trying to unfuck the Malon garbage scow that's going to blow up everything in a 300 light year radius or whatever.
Let's get to the episode though. Let's bang this one out. Let's actually talk
before
about
we
it.
get just too deep into the actual episode. Like, my end point is there's great stories to tell with B'Elanna. You know, her trying to have this science career and do these very unwarrior things and explore her engineering nature. Like, that's an interesting story to tell. Her being psychologically damaged because of all the trauma she's been through and all of her Maquis friends dying, that really got brought up in Extreme Risk. That's an interesting story to continue on. And these
Absolutely.
are open threads that we never really get resolved. And it makes me wonder, like, are those stories flukes that the writer's room just felt didn't resonate correctly, or there wasn't enough mileage there, that they just keep going back to the same tired ass concept that we have had? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the 6th time we've gone down this rabbit hole with her.
It's a real shame too, because it feels like when I think back to like episodes in DS9, right? Like episodes about characters like Dr. Bashir and how his character changes and how like major things happen and his development and how that plays forward into the the things that his character goes from that point forward. And like there's this real growth and this real change, and there's real things that happen in the story that get referenced later, right? And it's just so absent in something like this. There is no reference to anything B'Elanna has been through that kind of makes the premise of the story bunk. Because the premise of the story is B'Elanna's like without honor, right? Like she's not a real Klingon. She hasn't embraced her Klingon heritage. I already mentioned we had a whole episode devoted to her doing the Klingon Day of Honor and trying to embrace that. We've had multiple episodes where B'Elanna's heroism and honor has been critical to the success of Voyager's missions. That she has gone on a limb to defend her people and this extended family of Starfleet, that she has been adopted into. Like, there is so much they could have pulled on that happened in the show to B'Elanna, that this could have been an episode about exploring her growth and showing her growth and demonstrating like all of the things that she's accomplished and changed, and trying to show her mother like, oh, I'm a different person now, and these are all the things that have happened to me. And they punt on it all.
They could have made this into a clip show, like Shades of Grey from season. I think had it been a clip show of like proving to her mother and proving to the Klingon afterlife that, like, no, I have turned my life around, like, it would have been better than what we got here. Again, if this was season 1, this would have been a great place to start. And as you're pointing out here, we have addressed this thing. She has grown, and the fact that they're ignorant is a real crime. Maybe Ron Moore didn't watch the first couple seasons of Voyager, and I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. Brian Fuller, though, whose strength has been understanding the show, understanding the characters, knowing the journeys they've gone on to get where we're at in season 6, for him to be the teleplay and co-writing credit on this and letting Ron Moore get away with putting this out there, like, what the fuck happened, man? Like, did everybody just roll over and say, fine, Ron, make whatever you want and then get the fuck out of here?
Who knows? Like, this was at the end of the acrimonious divorce between Ron Moore and his Star Trek long term, at that point, Star Trek compatriots. So I don't I don't remember all the details anymore about how that divorce happened. I know it wasn't great. I was actually expecting the Memory Alpha to go into those details, but it didn't. It was a big deal at the
Memory
time. It was a
Alpha's
huge
been
deal.
very thin on information the past couple episodes. Like, I noticed the deeper we get into Voyager, the less info's actually present in these files, which is a little telling, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I pulled out of the well, two things that I pulled out of the Memory Alpha was, as you mentioned, I was thinking to myself, it felt like a DS9 episode upon rewatching, and sure enough, it actually was, as you said. And then second, apparently the woman that was playing B'Elanna's mother,
Only
the
a couple
actress
years
is
older.
only 4 years older than Roxanne Dawson. But Klingon makeup can make you as old as you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar situation with who played Quark's mom on DS9, was like similar age Armin Zimmerman. But
All right, so we start off with a bumpy time on a Federation issue Death Cart. You might know
absolutely,
it as a
yeah.
shuttlecraft. They're not in the Delta Flyer. B'Elanna's out there solo, it would seem. And she's coming up on Voyager, and she's like, oh shit, stuff's rough. I need help. And they're like, well, we're going to grab you with the tractor beam and throw you real sloppy for a crash landing in a shuttle. Why wouldn't you just beam her on board?
I think this is the first time we've ever seen an emergency landing of a shuttle, right? Like, I don't think this has ever been a thing before in Star
For
Trek.
Voyager, no, the Star Trek movie, the original series movies, they did it where it crashes
Okay.
into the cargo nets. But
TV though, in TV, this is new.
I cannot disprove that statement. I think you might be right.
And so the idea behind it of like, oh, you're coming in too hot, we're going to use like a tractor beam to like slow you down so that we can like bring you into the shuttle bay, like kind of like the plane trying to land on the carrier, like like, oh, you got a busted wing, we got to get you down. Interesting idea, but yeah, like why not just beam her aboard and then like keep the shuttle out there and just like bump it with a tractor beam and then like collect it later, right? Like no real reason to do this, but they do it. And she's having a bad day because she's trying to get a hold of the much ballyhooed multi-spatial probe, and it got lost in an ion storm, and she got all fucked up from it.
I maintain that they have never really demonstrated what the value of the multispatial probe is, and it has been the MacGuffin for so many near-miss disasters with Voyager that I don't know. Like, there must have been a deleted scene out there as to why this thing's such a big fucking deal.
It's critical to their capacity to replicate food that isn't noble root stew, and therefore it is their most precious resource.
Look at that, Joe. You're a better writer than the Voyager.
Bam! I'm like 2/3 drunk, and I managed to get there. Like,
the multispatial probe allows us to manufacture photon torpedoes. Without it, we would have been out of photon torpedoes 3 years ago. And
except
also,
for the ones that we beamed off of the Equinox, because all they found in all the treasure chests in the Delta Quadrant were all the torpedoes we didn't find.
It makes coffee,
as established,
and Julian fries. It's not a replicator. It only does those two things. It's like the slap chop of the Federation.
It needs to go into Nebula Space Babies to collect its juice.
Yeah, only it doesn't run away on its back leaking piss. She crashes into the shuttle bay. Tom comes in to treat her grievous wounds because, she's not important enough for the fucking doctor to come down. There's a bunch of stuff I'm writing in my notes like, oh, this seems a little off. This seems a little off. Well, it doesn't fucking matter because it's all a dream.
So I did want to ask you about that. And I'm glad you kind of segued into you were noticing that things were off. I thought that was a clever part of the episode, was before they kind of, let the beat drop and let you know that it's a dream. They kind of show, like, there's little things that seem a little bit, this doesn't seem right. Like, not so much that immediately it's a dream, but it's enough to be like there's something weird going on. Because it starts with Janeway calling her just Lana instead of B'Elanna, and it's like, mother used to call me that. I'm like, oh, okay, well, good company. That's great. And she's like, that's weird. And then she gets an artifact, like a piece of debris, like got into her fucking like motor on her death cart, and it's
she got a
piece
screw
of
in her tire.
Yeah, and it's a piece of a Klingon ship,
which just so conveniently has the Klingon Empire logo stamped on it. And again, I'm writing my notebook like, of course, that metal just happened to have the logo. This is getting dumb. Chakotay leaves the room, and then she hears some Klingons yelling shit, and then the logo melts off in bad 90s CGI and pools into blood on the glass table. And she takes it down to engineering, and Harry's like, I don't really care. It's 3 a.m. You're just going crazy. Credit again to Voyager writing room. Like, when something goofy happens, unlike Next Gen, where people notoriously kept their sanity doubts to themselves, like Voyager is very open about like, hey, a giant butthole opened and a space baby came out and said my name backward and then disappeared. And people are like, we're going to take this at face value. Start checking for chromaton particles or whatever. You know, the trend continues here. But
I did like the idea of Harry Kim being bitchy because he hasn't slept. Like the idea of like, we've tried everything. It's 3:00 in the morning. Can I please go to bed? You're my superior officer, so I have to stay here scanning this fucking thing until you say you're done. But he's just like, his patience is gone. He's like, please let me go. Like, I actually thought that was one of the more convincing scenes that he's ever done on the show.
Yes. And good writing credit when he's just like, let's give up on it. Let's put it in a containment locker, which how many times have we had sloppy scripts like, let's just take the super plot element and just leave it on the shelf so it can, assimilate nosy crewmen. Drone.
Let's just, you know what? Top men can research this later. Let's put it with the Ark of the Covenant. Like, just worry about this tomorrow. I want to sleep.
Let's leave it right next to the warp core, and what's the worst that can happen?
Well, that's where you store everything dangerous from that.
So they say
photon grenades, bleeding pieces of metal, and space pipes,
sex robots.
Okay, and that too.
Yeah,
and Tom when he is a lizard person. Yeah, so this is when Neelix comes down too, right? Like he comes down like, hey, we found a piece from the Alpha Quadrant. We're gonna have a big Klingon party, and he's like weirdly insistent about it, and that's like check mark number 2 of this is weird.
No, it's not, because he starts telling stories about like, oh, did you know this funny fact about Klingon, whatever? And B'Elanna's like, why are you researching this? Like, since when do you give a fuck? And it's like, since when doesn't he give a fuck? Like, do you not remember stupid 1159 where he memorized all that bullshit about the Great Wall of China? Like, this is right on brand for Neelix.
You're right. That's not as sus as everything else. Like that is actually a little too on the nose for him to really be suspicious.
Now the Tuvok scene.
Yeah, that was fun.
So she goes to Tuvok on the off chance. And again, she's painting by numbers, and I appreciate it. Like, science isn't giving me a clear answer on this piece of metal being, possessed. Maybe I'm just going a little space madness. We've already set up that she's doing meditation sessions with Tuvok, and we know that Tuvok is a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Frosty, maybe? He doesn't have a good bedside manner.
No, he's a tactical Vulcan. He's very precise.
He's not above calling you Mrs. Turtlehead and rubbing your face in your own inadequacies.
He knows that's a way to get through to B'Elanna.
And it kind of starts like he's giving her some of that tough love, but then he goes off the deep end. The insults get like way more real, and it culminates in him cutting her fucking face.
Well, it isn't just cutting her face. He starts by getting a bat'leth. Okay, so he gets a bat'leth from another room. And then B'Elanna says the most true thing that B'Elanna's said in 6 years of this television program, which is the bat'leth is a stupid fucking weapon. Like, I almost clapped while sitting in my seat watching this episode of like, I forgot that was a line. Like, you're right. It is a stupid weapon. Thanks, Ron Moore, for knowing that. Tuvok is a stand for the Batleth. It's like, no, it's a warrior's weapon, and you're just too much of a bitch to understand that. And then there's some really cool Batleth kung fu that apparently Tim Russ does right there on screen, just whipping that thing around like he's a fucking pro. And he ends all of his demonstration, like his nunchuck demonstration with the fucking Batleth, by cutting B'Elanna right on the. He knows that's a way to get through to the B'Elanna.
Playing to the tropes, man. B'Elanna gets roughed up by a lot of her coworkers. 7 of 9, clearly, whether bites or phasers, like there's some real workplace violence there. The doctor has victimized her numerous times. Now we've got like, has she just moved to a point where she just doesn't even bother reporting it to Janeway anymore because it's clear she doesn't care?
It's like, seriously, when I think about it, almost every single one of her coworkers has committed violence against her in one way or another. Every single one. She's had subordinates. She's had people from
Vorik,
other divisions.
yeah.
Vorik, yeah. Like she had to fight Vorik to not have sex with him, I guess. Like that was literally what that fight was over. If I beat you up, I don't have to fuck you. Like that was what that was about.
Ever get in a fist fight with Seska? I don't think so.
No, Seska just kind of left the ship, and then she was Chakotay's problem.
I assume maybe Carrie might have had a shove on her at least to justify getting his nose broken.
Yeah, and then you've got all the 7 of 9 workplace shootings. You've had the doctor, as you've mentioned. Tom has, kind of been involved in physical altercations with her, some of them consensual. Has Chakotay ever committed workplace violence against? I guess like grabbing her and taking her to the holodeck towards secret Cardassian murder cave was a little rough.
Grab her by the arm, which you have demonstrated is...
Yeah, that's how you stop a woman in TV. You just grab them by the arm. They're immobilized. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like a lot of her coworkers, a lot of them. So like Tuvok being on the action is just like, this is just normal for me now. I'm used to this. I was a terrorist. Like I was coworkers with Lon Suter. So really this isn't a big deal.
The Neelix line that stood out to me was him saying that I'm not going to cancel the Klingon Appreciation Festival. I've already replicated 5 barrels of blood wine. And I'm like, man, no one has clued Ron more into the fact that like they're supposed to have replicator constraints. Like 5 barrels seems like a lot of replicator rations to sink into it. Again, it doesn't matter. It's a hallucination, whatever. But that was, I guess, the tip off that something was up with Neelix. We end up in this, after she gets her face cut by Tuvok, she goes up to the mess hall where they're doing this Klingon, I don't know, a cultural appropriation festival.
Yeah, so the whole mess hall is done up in like Klingon regalia. You've got the Doctor and 7 of 9 talking about Klingon drinking songs and then literally breaking into song, which makes them like 2 for 3 on the season for singing.
We get it. And that's been her being tortured to sing in Equinox Part 2, the goddamn My Fair Lady episode, which was season 5. But yeah, that's 2 out of the 3 episodes of 6 that Jerry's singing. All right.
Yeah, I guess after they unlocked that power in season, it was 4 when they had the Hirogen episode, right? It was season 4. So like that's when they were like, oh, Jerry Ryan can sing.
Forgot about that.
We should have her sing a lot.
I got a serious question for you, Joe. Did you confuse in your head Borg nanoprobes for Jerry Ryan singing? Because we haven't had a single Borg pixie dust episode where Borg nanoprobes save the day, minus when Neelix gets resurrected from the dead. But there's been a lot of Jerry Ryan singing. Like,
there has been more Jerry Ryan singing than the Borg nanoprobes. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think, wow. Yeah, I might have just conflated the two. I might have just which is unfortunate because she can sing. Like, I hate bagging on it that they keep doing it, but Jerry Ryan's actually good at this. It's just like a little too much, guys. Like, we get it. We get it that you get it, but you don't have to keep giving it to us.
Well, you're going to keep getting. I'll be curious to see how many more we get.
We get more. I'm sorry to tell you. I know of at least one more.
So she's at the Klingon birthday party, and things start getting goofy, and then Janeway's given a speech, and then it's slow motion, and Klingons just show up out of nowhere with batleths and knives, and then they just...
Start killing everybody. It's awful. It's terrible. And then
it's a waste of time. We know it's all bullshit, and I'm just like, oh man, this is fucking terrible.
And then Torres winds up on the ship with all of the DS9 extras. like, oh hey, it's all of the dudes in the Klingon makeup and the Klingon uniforms we don't need anymore. Like, because that show's over now. Like, hey, what's up, guys?
The set looks very simple, very community theater at the same time, very effective. There's a real community theater vibe to the whole thing.
It does remind me a lot of the Valkyrie Beowulf episode from season 1 for the Doctor.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. B'Elanna's like, why am I here? And they say, well, you're on the Barge of the Dead. You died on that shuttlecraft. Your memories of being back on Voyager was your brain tricking itself. And then the Klingons on this death barge killed the false beliefs. And now you're being forced to believe. And to this point, I'm just checking out. It's like, man, all this Klingon guilt stuff. And just like you said, faces, whatever her bad day at work was, all of this stuff's been addressed. And this just does not jive with where we should be in season 6.
Let me explain some context that, Peter, you do not have because you've not watched a lot of DS9. So as much as you might remember some of the Klingon lore stuff from TNG, Redemption and some of the other episodes, Ron Moore basically bukkakied all of his Klingon shit in DS9. Like, that show is dense with Klingon lore, and even like the mythological stuff in particular, and having to do with the afterlife. And so not knowing any of this makes this feel much more like, where is this coming from, than if you came from having consumed all of that. Where B'Elanna is supposed to be from a mythological perspective is in the bad side of the Klingon afterlife. They're basically, the Klingons are space Viking samurai, so they have a good afterlife, which is basically Valhalla Sto-vo-kor, which is the one you always hear about, and this is the one you don't hear about, which is a Klingon hell, Grothor. And she's on essentially a boat to hell right now, and you get on the boat to hell if you lived a dishonorable life versus an honorable one. But the Klingon sense of honor being a little bit more, shall we say, barbarian than, shall we say, you might understand from a Western philosophical perspective.
Another hard part of this episode for me is confusion as to what's actually going on. Is she hallucinating all of this? And that would seem to be the case because running through the rest of this Barge of the Damned portion, the captain of the barge is the first Klingon who killed all the Klingon gods, and his punishment is now he has to ship treasonous, treacherous scum around. She finds out that her mom's on the ship. Her mom had died, and because of her refusal to be honorable, which again is bullshit because of all the other episodes where B'Elanna goes through this, that her mom's getting dragged to hell over her actions, and she feels conflicted about it. And then she wakes up on the sickbay table. We find out that she's been in a coma, that she, all that beginning stuff was just a hallucination, and that she's fine. But she's shaken, and she's got this belief that her mom is going to suffer, and she wants to go back in another near-death experience to save it.
Voyager's had a few brushes with afterlife-based episodes, right? Like Space Spider Island. We've had the episode where Kess licked the hell mouth, and you had Janeway, who had to go through a very spiritual circumstance to retrieve her soul, basically. And then Neelix had a near-death experience. She was resurrected by the Borg pixie dust. and he didn't experience an afterlife, and that was actually a great episode that we
The best
enjoyed.
one.
And so, this is another like what is real about these circumstances kind of like open-ended question. I There's a couple things I thought were really clever in this initial part. One was that there's a suggestion that the experience of a person in their afterlife is based on their personal belief structure, because there's straight up a line of "I used to believe in you when I was a kid," and then like the Klingon like mythological boat captain is like, "If you didn't believe, you wouldn't be here," which kind of conveys something that's hinted in Star Trek, which is a particular character's experience in the afterlife is based on their belief structure, which is weird, but like that.
While we're talking about things that happen in the afterlife, let us not forget the soul-sucking demon.
Yeah, Ron, just going around the Delta Quadrant that they never dealt with.
Yeah,
didn't get Janeway's soul, but it's still out there
with a grudge.
Yeah.
So that's my conflict in this, is as I'm trying to watch the rest of this episode, she gets pulled back. We see that it's not an alien ruse. It's not her on a holodeck being tricked. She even tries to turn it off. It's either a full-on hallucination or she's really touching the afterlife, and the afterlife is real. And that becomes a conflict because you don't get a clear answer, really. I mean, she tries to go back and recreate the situation that of the coma in the first place, and she does, and she lives out the rest of maybe a fantasy, I don't know. But I love the way they handled Neelix's near-death experience. The courage the show had to not give you a cut and dry answer, and maybe there is nothing after, like. And now we default to this, that just because it's Klingons, like, we're going to indulge, or maybe because Ron Moore doesn't care about the other episodes of Voyager. It seemed like a big backslide on the ambiguity that Voyager had established earlier.
I could not possibly agree with you more. The very best part of the last time we went down this road was that Neelix was confronted by the idea that there was nothing. And it drove him to a point where he nearly committed suicide because he couldn't handle the psychological shock of using the idea of, like, I'm going to seal off my friends and family when I die. And then he died, and that none of that happened, and there was nothing, and he didn't know how to handle it. And there wasn't an explanation or comforting answer at the end of that episode. It was an uncomfortable silence of, you'll have to carry that weight, and there are just some things that are unknown. And despite like Chakotay in particular, the MVP of that episode's best efforts of explaining, like, there's just shit we don't know, Neelix. Like, I can't answer this for you. And the show doesn't. And this is the exact opposite. It is almost telling you, like, there is an afterlife, and it is like catering to you, because in the end, all of B'Elanna's experiences in hell essentially are geared towards helping her, right? And like, she ends up moving on from this near-death experience by coming to terms with her own, inadequacies and temper and all of her like character flaws, and like saying, I don't want to like be a bad person anymore. So like, it's very like Hallmark episode-y, and it kind of like tells you, yes, there is an afterlife and it's here to help, which is very different tonally than what we saw last season.
Yep. So you're stuck with this episode where, is this just a big waste of time because Voyager's already kind of shown us that there's no afterlife? Is this setting real precedent for what is there real? Again, Ron Moore in this fucking afterlife, Battlestar Galactica, it's where it fell apart in Battlestar Galactica, and it does not do any better here. So
yeah, he's really bad at religion.
And he loves it. He loves
it, and he's bad at it.
And I could not give a fuck watching this. They finally end up near hell. It's terrible 1991 CD-ROM Sierra Activision CGI graphics.
It's straight up like a scene from an adventure game that you didn't want to play.
Yes. It is fucking awful. I'm still rolling my eyes. It was so bad. Her mother, you get front row seats to who B'Elanna Torres's mom is. And I will tell you that she is 100% not a woman that would enter into a long-term relationship with a human male.
Let's just say I don't know what the sexual angles of the 24th century are, but I can't imagine a future where that kind of teeth is something that I would want to be involved with one way or another.
She's so wrapped up in honor and tradition and everything else. And you're telling me this lady hooked up with the human and moved in with him.
And married him. They were married. Like, what?
I don't buy it at all. I do not buy it at all. And had they not talked about the father at all, and okay, well, this is Ron Moore with a limited understanding of B'Elanna Torres, and they're just shying away from things that don't jive. But the dad becomes such a big point of contention in their conversations, drawing attention specifically to it. It just doesn't hold up at all. So I don't know. My big takeaway for the episode is the first Klingon has really nasty circular holes in his head instead of traditional notches. It looks like his forehead's made out of glory holes. I called him Captain Glory Hole. Janeway is acting just as goofy and crazy as ever. Torres is like, you guys woke me up out of the coma, but I was there. I saw death for real. And my wishes, that's another fucking trope we keep going back to, is B'Elanna's wishes at a direct conflict with the captain having a desire to keep her crew safe. Sometimes Janeway stands her ground and says, tough shit, we're doing things my way. You're going to let the Cardassian war criminal hologram take the mutant parasite off you. In this case, it's, I want to go brain dead again. And her thing.
I really actually did like the scene that they shared where she's trying to say, I've had this spiritual experience. I need to explore it further. This is religious to me. You need to let me. And she's like, listen, I'm not going to have an argument about religious freedom on this ship. I'm not going to let people do things that are dangerous to themselves and others. I'm going to let you sacrifice a fucking baby. I'm not going to let you kill yourself. It's just not on the table. And
I'm not going to let you sacrifice a baby. What do I look like, Captain Ransom?
Right. We just beat those guys. Come on. And the way she turns the conversation around is, she makes it very personal in that, listen, it's one of the few moments where there's an acknowledgement of her growth. It's I've become a better person and a good officer because of you. And my mother never got to see me grow. And if this all happened and this is real, this is my only opportunity I'll ever have for her to see that and for me to help her. And that's what I want to do. And that's why it's important to me. It's one of the few moments in the entire episode that seems to really connect itself to the rest of what's happened in B'Elanna's story. And what's unfortunate is that there's no other connective tissue, right? When she gets there isn't a demonstration of her honor, I guess, aside from saying she'll go to hell in her mother's place or whatever. But that almost seems too easy, right? You kind of know she's getting out of that. That isn't a real sacrifice.
So, the rest of the plot then goes that her plan is to take her mother's place, and then once her mother is safe, signal the real world so they can wake her up out of dream matrix and she can skip out on going to hell. But Captain Glory Hole knows what up, and he senses the deception and that her friends are waiting. And he says, you're going to have to take this responsibility. No tricks. You got to sign on the dotted line and go to hell for real. And she goes, Mom, I love you so much. Okay. And then she starts slipping. And in the real world, they can't pull her out of the coma. And oh my goodness, everything's so bad. And then they pull up on CGI Doom version 1 hell, and they kick her out on the coals. And she wakes up in hell, but her version of hell is Voyager, but everybody's extra nasty. And then I don't even know what the fuck really happens. Everybody's being real mean and shitty, but it's they're just negging her, basically.
It's this weird sort of they're trying to do tough love, but it just seems kind of bitchy to like drive her to a point where she like, okay, I'm not gonna push everyone away anymore. It's the last scene is neat. Like and this is kind of where I think I'm higher on the episode than you. There are pieces of this that are cool, right? The Janeway scene is neat, and then the last scene is neat where like all of her friends are surrounding her and she's going through like her identity crisis and real things that have happened to her character where like, would you want me to be a good Starfleet officer or a Maquis or lover or like what? Like she's been pulled in all these different directions through her character history. We've seen that, but the problem is it's a fake conflict for this episode. It's a well acted scene, like the emotional catharsis is well done in the moment, but like, well, wait a second, like we've resolved the idea of your terrorist turned Starfleet officer identity 5 years ago at this point. Like, why is this still on your mind? We've had an entire episodes devoted to you coming to terms with your relationship with Tom, between blood fever and then your worst day at work ever against the fried chicken people. Like we've done all of this. Why are we doing this again? We don't have to. And so it's just like, this is neat, but it's also stupid.
I've never been so checked out by the end of an episode. I think 11:59 may have held my attention better than this did. And again, it's not knocking any of the actors involved. Everybody does a
as
good
usual,
job.
Roxanne Dawson, the underrated talent of the Voyager acting crew. She is good every time they put the fucking camera on her.
No matter how bad her hair looks.
Yeah, like I can't think of a single episode where I think Roxanne Dawson doesn't bring, adequate effort at a minimum. And when she has her highlight episode, she does a damn fine job of trying to deliver on the drama she's being asked to deliver. And this is no exception. Yeah. But it's just there's
the wrong time for this story.
It's just been the wrong development.
It's the wrong time for this story, and it's in a bad fit for the type of story. If this was early season 2, 3, sure. If this was before we got better Afterlife episodes, or you had somehow worked this Barge of the Dead where it was we shit on Chakotay's spirit journey stuff. Sometimes there's good ones. Again, Neelix went on an interesting spirit journey, and I'm sure we ribbed it, but the one where there's the Napoleon Dynamite space vampires, and he's got like the moon in the background, and he like fights the wolf, and then he fights the alien.
Right.
It's not the worst use of a spirit journey for him, right? Spirit journey, I think, is a good placeholder for exactly what this is in a near-death experience. You want to explore metaphysical, deep psychological trauma and conflicted emotions. You can create this isolated sandbox where you do all this supernatural, spiritual adventuring without saying heaven is real or hell is real or the afterlife is real. It still keeps that a gray area, great unknown, while giving you whatever emotional development you wanted the character to go through.
I'll be honest with you. I still hated the Chakotay Dream Warrior episode. I think turning his background into a supernatural ability is still just the stupidest fucking thing. But Chakotay as a character has undergone a tremendous amount of growth over the course of this series. And for some reason, the writers seem to be better at using that than they are almost everyone else, which is a little weird.
They do. There is a good barb in this episode when everybody's like their evil hallucination versions of hell, and everybody's giving her a hard time. Like Chakotay does kind of rib her like, oh, are you sure you're interpreting hell correctly and looking at all the iconography in the right light?
Yeah, that is a fun, like, haha, that is definitely a Chakotay being shitty kind of, like, that's a neat line to take with that. That's good.
And I'll agree with you. Him being able to astrally project or whatever he does with just a little bit of hand vibration, space peyote, it's weak, but it's already on the table. It's a system already in play. And if you want to tell these types of stories, you have a clear conduit to do it that's established and someone who can guide you through it. There's no need to put definites in play the way that this did. So I hated this episode. Again, it's not a bad episode, but it's not for me. It left a real bad taste in my mouth. It was boring.
I feel like this episode only needed one scene, and I had it written in my head, and I'll share it with you to like salvage it. It wouldn't have made it good, but it would have made it okay. And it would have been like B'Elanna with talking with Harry, like in the mess hall, right? Because they're friends. Like he's her oldest friend on the ship, like literally from the pilot. And
minus Chakotay, sure.
Minus Chakotay, but like let's call it Harry because it's more of a peer relationship than a mentor relationship, right? And say, listen, you know, like where she's bothered and pensive, and she conveys like she's talking with her about like, you know, how she feels and how she feels isolated and torn apart. And like Harry's like, what are you talking about? Like you've been the chief engineer of the ship for 6 years. People, you know, respect you. Tom loves you. Like you've got friends. Like even Seven likes you. Like all this other stuff. Like, you know, like where he's trying to convey like you've grown, you've changed, all of these things have happened, and then she conveys in that scene, I acknowledge that these things have happened, but I still have these unresolved pieces of my own life that hold me back, right? If the episode had had that scene, so much of this could have been forgiven. Acknowledgement of the past, acknowledgement of the growth that's occurred, and then set up for this episode. That's all it would have taken. 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes with an established relationship between two characters. No problem. But it just didn't have that, and so it just felt worthless.
It did feel worthless. At the end of the day, I don't care about Klingon lore. It doesn't do it for me. I would be curious what Klingon fanboys feel about this episode.
They fucking love this shit. Like, I'm like, I'm medium on it. I think some of it's really interesting, and like the idea of like Klingon hell and Klingon, you know, like the barge and the significance of like the people that jump off the barge and like get eaten by eels, even though like their souls have been destroyed, I guess, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of depth here to like people who get off on that, and I'm not one of them, so I don't care.
All right, man, I'm done talking about this.
What I care about is what we're watching next week. And what is that?
We're going into season 6, episode 4, Tinker, Tenor, Doctor, Spy. And we've got a picture of Janeway and Chakotay chilling out in their command stations. The Doctor's experiment with daydreaming spins out of control when an alien race taps into his thoughts and compromises his program. Is it going to be our first time to take the freshly minted Dr. Evil title out for a spin?
No. This is an episode played for laughs. This is a comedy episode. But it's actually like a lot of fun. I've enjoyed rewatching this.
Well, they're saying tenor. That's in regards to music. Is Jerry Ryan going to be singing yet again? Are we going to go 3 for 4?
Well, so this is an allusion to the title of a book and also a very good movie.
I get it.
Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. So you know, it's an allusion to a British spy novel. So don't take it too literally. Although the Doctor does sing in it. I can guarantee you that. It's actually in the opening.
All right. Well, it can't possibly be any worse than what we just watched. So there's that, I suppose.
I can completely assure you that it is not as bad as what we just watched. And on that note, thanks for listening to Voyager, please, I guess.
Dron Moore, feel free to see yourself out and don't let the door hit you on your way out.
You can go, and next time you write for a sci-fi property, please stop putting a whole bunch of religious bullshit in. We're tired.
For real.
Talk to you later.